Imagine you are a powerful king, but you feel uncertain about life. You want to know when is the right time to act, who is the most important person, and what is the most important thing to do. You believe that if you find the answers, you will never fail in anything. This is the story of a king who goes on a journey to find these answers. And in the end, he learns them not through words but through experience. This timeless story by Leo Tolstoy is not just a tale. It's a lesson in living wisely. Join me as we explore this story in this audiobook called The King's Three Questions. The story begins with a king who wanted to be wise and successful in everything he did. He believed that if he could find the answers to three important questions, he would never make a mistake in life. His three questions were simple but very deep. First, he wanted to know when was the right time to do anything. Second, he wanted to know who was the most important person in any situation. And third, he wanted to know what was the most important thing to do. The king thought that if he found the correct answers to these questions, he would always make the best decisions. He believed that knowing the right time, the right person, and the right action would help him rule his kingdom wisely and avoid failure. So he decided to ask the wisest people in his kingdom. He called his advisors, scholars, and learned men and asked them these three questions. But the answers he received were all different. When he asked about the right time to do something, some people said he must make a detailed plan for every hour, day, and year so he would always be prepared. Others said that he could never plan everything in advance, and instead, he should always pay attention to what is happening around him and act according to the situation. Some people believed that he needed a group of wise men who could tell him the best time for every action. When he asked about the most important person, some said it was his soldiers because they protected the kingdom. Others said it was his ministers because they helped him rule wisely. Some believed it was priests and holy men because they guided people with wisdom. Others said the most important person was the doctor because health was the most valuable thing. For the third question about the most important thing to do, people gave different answers again. Some said the most important thing was science because it helped people understand the world. Others said the most important thing was religion because it guided people to live a good life. Some believed the most important thing was fighting wars and protecting the kingdom, while others said it was prayer and meditation. The king was not satisfied with any of these answers. Everyone had their own opinion, but none of them seemed completely right. He wanted a clear answer, something that was true in every situation. Since the wise men of his kingdom could not agree, he decided to visit a famous hermit who lived in the forest. This hermit was known for his great wisdom, and he only spoke to simple people, never to kings or rich men. The king dressed in simple clothes and left his palace alone, without his guards or servants. He walked into the deep forest, searching for the wise hermit. After some time, he found the hermit outside his small hut, digging the ground with a spade. The hermit was old and weak, and the work seemed difficult for him. The king approached him and said, "I have come to ask you 3 questions." But the hermit did not answer. He simply kept digging the ground, slowly and with great effort. The king watched for a while and then repeated his questions. Still, the hermit did not respond. Instead, he continued his work, breathing heavily from the effort. The king felt sorry for the old man. He thought to himself that maybe the hermit was too tired to talk, so he offered to help. He took the spade from the hermit's hands and started digging the ground himself. The hermit sat down to rest while the king continued the work. Hours passed, and the king kept digging, but the hermit still said nothing. The sun was now beginning to set, and the king finally stopped and said, "I came here to ask you my 3 questions. If you cannot answer them, please let me know, and I will return home." Just then, something unexpected happened. Before the hermit could answer the king, they heard a noise coming from the forest. The king and the hermit turned and saw a man running toward them. The man was holding his stomach, and his clothes were covered in blood. He looked weak and in great pain. As he came closer, he stumbled and fell to the ground. The king and the hermit rushed to him and saw that he had a deep wound in his stomach. He was badly injured and needed immediate help. Without hesitation, the king bent down and carefully lifted the man. His hands became covered in blood, but he did not care. He gently placed the wounded man on the ground and began tending to his wound. The hermit brought some fresh water, and the king washed the wound carefully. Then, he tore a piece of his own clothing to bandage the injury and stop the bleeding. The man moaned in pain, but after a while, he seemed to feel a little better. The king and the hermit carried him inside the hut and laid him down on a simple bed. The king stayed beside him, giving him water and making sure he was comfortable. The wounded man was exhausted, and soon he fell into a deep sleep. The king was also tired from the long day, so he sat down beside the man and rested. That night, the king could not sleep properly. He kept thinking about the man and wondering who he was and why he was wounded. He also thought about his 3 questions, which the hermit still had not answered. He had come all this way to find wisdom, but instead, he had spent the entire day helping the hermit dig and taking care of a wounded stranger. In the morning, the wounded man woke up. He looked at the king with deep gratitude in his eyes. Then, something surprising happened. The man suddenly spoke and said, "Please forgive me." The king was confused. He had never seen this man before. "Forgive you?" the king asked. "For what?" The man sighed and looked ashamed. Then he explained, "Your Majesty, you do not know me, but I know you. I am your enemy. Some time ago you executed my brother and took away my land. I wanted revenge, so I followed you when you left your palace. My plan was to attack you on your way back, but your guards were not with you, so I waited in hiding. However, when you did not return, I grew impatient and came out of the forest. That is when your guards saw me and attacked me. They wounded me, and I barely escaped. I was bleeding and would have died if you had not saved me." The king listened carefully, shocked by what he heard. The very man who had planned to kill him was now lying before him, weak and helpless. But instead of taking revenge, the king had helped him and saved his life. Tears filled the wounded man's eyes. "Your Majesty," he continued, "you have saved my life. Instead of hating you, I now want to serve you with all my heart. If I live, I will be your most loyal servant. I promise to bring my family and friends to your side. I will never be your enemy again." The king was moved by these words. He felt no anger toward the man. Instead, he felt peace in his heart. He realized that by helping his enemy, he had turned him into a friend. He told the man, "Do not worry. I forgive you, and I will return your land to you." The two men shook hands, and the enemy became the king's friend. By now, the king had forgotten all about his 3 questions. But the hermit, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. He smiled and looked at the king. "Your questions have been answered," he said. The king was surprised when the hermit said that his questions had already been answered. He had spent the whole day digging the ground, helping a wounded man, and taking care of him. He had not received any direct answers to his 3 questions. He looked at the hermit and asked, "How have my questions been answered?" The hermit smiled and said, "Yesterday, if you had not decided to help me dig the ground, you would have left. And if you had left, that man would have attacked you on your way back. You would not have met him as a wounded man but as an enemy, and the situation could have ended badly for you both. So, the most important time was when you were digging the ground. The most important person at that moment was me, the hermit, because I was the one in front of you. And the most important thing to do at that time was to help me because that is what needed to be done." The king listened carefully as the hermit continued. "Later, when the wounded man arrived, the most important time was when you took care of him. If you had not helped him, he would have died, and you would have lost the chance to turn an enemy into a friend. The most important person at that moment was the wounded man because he needed your help the most. And the most important thing to do at that moment was to take care of his wound and save his life." The king began to understand, but the hermit was not finished yet. He explained further, "The most important time is always now, the present moment. It is the only time we can control. The most important person is always the one you are with at that moment because you never know what role they may play in your life. And the most important thing to do is always to do good for the person who is with you because that is the purpose of life." The king stood in silence, thinking deeply about the hermit's words. He had come searching for answers, expecting something complex and difficult to understand. But now, he realized the truth was simple. The answers were not found in books or from scholars. They were found in his own actions and experiences. He remembered how he had helped the hermit dig the ground. He had not done it because he expected a reward but because it felt like the right thing to do. He thought about the wounded man. If he had not helped him, the man would have remained his enemy. But by showing kindness, he had won his loyalty and friendship. Everything had happened in the present moment and every decision had shaped the outcome. The hermit's lesson was clear. People often spend their time worrying about the future or regretting the past, but the only moment that truly matters is the present. The future is unknown, and the past cannot be changed. What we do in the present moment is what shapes our lives. The king felt a great sense of peace and wisdom. He now understood that true success did not come from planning every step in life. It came from being fully present, helping others, and doing good whenever possible. He turned to the hermit and bowed deeply. "You have given me the greatest wisdom," he said. "I will remember your words and rule my kingdom with this knowledge." The hermit nodded and smiled. He had nothing more to say. The king had found his answers, not through words alone, but through his own experiences. The king left the forest with a new understanding of life. He no longer worried about always knowing the right time, the right person, or the right action. He simply focused on the present moment, treating the people around him with kindness and doing what was needed at that time. And from that day on, he ruled his kingdom with wisdom, fairness, and compassion. The king returned to his palace with a calm mind. He now understood the wisdom the hermit had given him. His heart felt lighter, and he no longer worried about the 3 questions that had troubled him before. But the real test of his understanding was yet to come. As a ruler, the king had many responsibilities. Every day, ministers came to him with reports, problems, and requests. Some were about the kingdom's economy, while others were about disputes among people. Some required decisions about war and peace. Before meeting the hermit, he would have spent hours thinking about what was the right time to act, who were the most important people, and what was the most important thing to do. But now he had a different way of looking at things. One day, a dispute arose between 2 villages in his kingdom. Both villages claimed ownership of a piece of fertile land that lay between them. The land was important because it provided food and resources, and both sides refused to give it up. The argument had been going on for years, but now it had turned violent. People had started fighting, and there was a risk that the conflict would spread to the entire kingdom. The king called his ministers and advisors. Some of them suggested that he send his army to take control of the land by force. Others said he should punish both villages for disturbing the peace. But the king remembered the lesson from the hermit. Instead of rushing to make a decision based on fear or anger, he asked himself, "What is the most important time? Who are the most important people? What is the most important thing to do?" He realized that the most important time was now. The longer he waited, the worse the situation could become. The most important people were not his ministers or generals, but the villagers themselves, because they were the ones suffering. And the most important thing to do was not to punish them, but to find a way to bring peace and understanding. So, instead of sending soldiers, the king traveled to the disputed land himself. He gathered the leaders of both villages and listened carefully to their concerns. He did not act as a distant ruler giving orders, but as someone who truly wanted to help. He asked them about their struggles, their needs, and their fears. At first, the villagers were angry and blamed each other. But when they saw the king listening patiently and treating both sides with respect, their anger began to calm. The king then suggested a solution. Instead of fighting over the land, they could share it. He proposed dividing the land fairly so that both villages could benefit. He also offered to provide support to improve farming in the area, ensuring that everyone had enough resources. This solution surprised the villagers. They had been so focused on winning the land for themselves that they had never considered sharing it. Slowly, they began to realize that fighting was not the answer. With the king's help, they reached an agreement, and peace was restored. The king had solved the problem not with force or punishment but with wisdom and understanding. He had applied the lesson he had learned from the hermit. He acted in the present moment, focused on the people who needed him the most, and did what was truly good for them. This experience strengthened his belief in the hermit's wisdom. He continued to apply it in every aspect of his rule. Whenever he faced a difficult decision, he reminded himself that the present moment was the only time that truly mattered. He treated everyone he met as the most important person at that time, whether they were rich or poor, powerful or weak. And he always chose to do good, knowing that kindness and wisdom were stronger than fear and force. Over the years, his kingdom flourished. People trusted him because they saw that he ruled with fairness and kindness. Other rulers admired him and sought his advice. His kingdom became known as a place of peace and prosperity. The lessons he had learned from the hermit did not just change his own life. They changed the lives of everyone around him. The king had once thought that wisdom could only come from books, scholars, or deep study. But in the end, he realized that true wisdom was simple. It was about being fully present, helping others, and making the right choices based on kindness and understanding. And with this wisdom, he ruled not just as a king but as a guide, a protector, and a true leader of his people. As time passed, the king's way of ruling became well known across his kingdom and beyond. People spoke of his wisdom, fairness, and kindness. He had once been a ruler who sought answers from wise men and scholars, but now he understood that wisdom was not about complex theories or endless discussions. It was about being present, helping those around him, and doing what was right at the moment. One day, an old merchant from a faraway land came to the king's court. He was wealthy and respected but carried a deep sadness in his eyes. When the king asked him what troubled him, the merchant sighed and said, "Your Majesty, I have spent my whole life building my business. I have traveled to many lands, made great profits, and earned the respect of powerful people. But now that I am old, I feel empty. I do not know what I have truly achieved. I have wealth, but it does not bring me joy. I have servants, but I feel lonely. I do not know what I should do with the rest of my life." The king listened carefully and then asked, "When you were young, what was your goal in life?" The merchant thought for a moment and replied, "I wanted to be rich and successful. I worked hard, and I achieved it. But now, I see that money alone does not bring happiness." The king nodded and said, "Tell me, when was the last time you truly felt happy?" The merchant hesitated, searching his memories. Then he said, "There was a time when I was traveling through a desert. I had a caravan filled with valuable goods, but we ran out of water. My men were exhausted, and we thought we would die. Then, a poor shepherd found us. He gave us water from his own supply, even though he had little for himself. He saved our lives. That night we sat around a fire, shared simple food, and talked about life. At that moment, I felt a peace that I have never felt again. The king smiled and said, "And what do you think made that moment so special?" The merchant was silent for a while, then replied, "It was because I was not thinking about business or money. I was just present. I was grateful for the water, the food, and the kindness of the shepherd. I was living in the moment." The king said, "That is the answer you are looking for. Happiness does not come from wealth, power, or success. It comes from being fully present and appreciating the people around you. You were happy that night because you were not thinking of the past or worrying about the future. You were living in the moment, and you were grateful for the kindness you received." The merchant listened carefully. The king continued, "You have spent your life collecting wealth, but what truly matters is what you do with it. The most important time is now. The most important people are those who are with you at this moment. And the most important thing to do is to use what you have to do good." The merchant sat in deep thought. He realized that he had been searching for happiness in the wrong place. He had been so focused on building his fortune that he had forgotten to live in the present and appreciate the people around him. He decided that he would use his wealth to help others. Instead of just trading goods, he would build wells in dry regions, set up schools for children, and provide shelter for travelers. Over time, the merchant became known not just for his wealth but for his generosity and kindness. He found a new sense of purpose, and his heart felt lighter. He returned to the king one day and said, "Your Majesty, I have found what I was missing. I no longer count my wealth in gold and silver. I count it in smiles, in lives improved, in kindness shared. And now, I finally feel at peace." The king was pleased. He had not given the merchant gold or land. He had simply shared the wisdom he had learned from the hermit, that the only time that matters is now, the only people who matter are the ones around us, and the best thing to do is to help others. This lesson spread across the kingdom. People began to understand that life was not about chasing wealth or power, but about being present, showing kindness, and making each moment meaningful. Farmers helped their neighbors in times of need. Merchants treated their workers with respect. Soldiers protected the weak not just with their swords but with their compassion. The kingdom flourished not because of riches but because of the wisdom that guided its people. And at the heart of it all was a king who had once been troubled by 3 questions, but had found his answers not in books or grand teachings, but in simple acts of kindness and presence. The king's wisdom spread far and wide. His people admired him, and neighboring rulers sought his advice. He had transformed his kingdom not by using force or fear, but by understanding the power of the present moment, the value of the people around him, and the importance of doing good. However, wisdom is not something that is learned once and forgotten. It must be practiced every day, and challenges will always arise to test it. One such challenge came in the form of a powerful nobleman. This nobleman was wealthy, influential, and proud. He had vast lands, many servants, and great influence in the kingdom. However, he was not content. He wanted more power, more recognition, and more control over others. He believed that the king's kindness was a sign of weakness. He thought that a true ruler should be feared, not loved. One day he came to the king's court and said, "Your Majesty, I have observed how you rule. You treat the people with kindness, you listen to their problems, and you help them. But I must tell you, this is not how a strong ruler behaves. People should obey a king out of fear, not out of love. If you continue this way, others will take advantage of your kindness. Your enemies will see you as weak, and they will strike when you least expect it." The king listened patiently. He did not interrupt or dismiss the nobleman's words. Instead, he asked, "Tell me, what do you believe makes a ruler strong?" The nobleman replied, "A strong ruler must have complete control. He must make decisions quickly, without worrying about what others think. He must punish those who disobey and show no mercy to those who question his authority. Fear is the only way to ensure that people respect the throne." The king nodded thoughtfully and then said, "Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a mighty tree standing alone in the middle of a field?" The nobleman was surprised by the question but answered, "Yes, of course." The king continued, "And have you seen a great storm with strong winds and heavy rain?" "Yes," the nobleman said. The king smiled and said, "When a great storm comes, what happens to that mighty tree?" The nobleman thought for a moment and then replied, "If the storm is strong enough, the tree will be uprooted and fall." The king nodded again. "Exactly. A tree that stands too rigid, refusing to bend, will eventually break. But have you ever seen a field of grass?" The nobleman hesitated, then said, "Yes, I have." "And what happens to the grass when the storm comes?" the king asked. "The grass bends with the wind," the nobleman said. "And after the storm has passed, what happens to the grass?" "It rises again," the nobleman said, realizing the meaning behind the king's words. The king said, "Power that relies only on fear is like the mighty tree. It may seem strong, but when the storm comes, it will fall. True strength is not about standing tall and rigid. It is about understanding when to bend, when to listen, and when to act with wisdom. A ruler who rules through fear will always be afraid. Afraid of rebellion, afraid of betrayal, afraid of losing power. But a ruler who rules with wisdom and kindness will never be alone, for his people will stand by him, not out of fear, but out of trust and respect." The nobleman was silent. He had always believed that fear was the greatest weapon of a ruler. But now, he saw that fear created enemies, while kindness created allies. He began to understand that strength was not about forcing others to obey, but about inspiring them to follow. The king then said, "You believe that kindness is weakness, but let me ask you what requires more courage: to rule by fear where you must always look over your shoulder, always worry about betrayal? Or to rule by love, where people follow you willingly because they trust you? The nobleman had no answer. He realized that ruling through fear was not true strength. It was only an illusion of control. A ruler who was loved and respected would always be stronger than one who was feared. From that day on, the nobleman changed his ways. He no longer sought power through fear. Instead, he used his wealth and influence to help others. He became one of the king's greatest supporters, helping to spread the wisdom of ruling with fairness, compassion, and understanding. And so, the kingdom continued to flourish. The people no longer feared their ruler. They loved and respected him. They knew that their king was not only wise but also just and kind. They trusted him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And in this way, the king proved that true strength was not about controlling others. It was about leading with wisdom, understanding, and a heart full of kindness. As the kingdom flourished under the king's wisdom, his reputation spread beyond his borders. Travelers, scholars, and rulers from distant lands came to see his court and learn from his way of ruling. The people of the kingdom were happy and content, knowing that their king was fair, just, and kind. However, peace and wisdom are always tested in unexpected ways. One day, a group of merchants arrived at the palace, seeking an audience with the king. They were wealthy traders who traveled across many lands, buying and selling goods. They had heard about the king's wisdom and wanted to see if he truly ruled with fairness and kindness. When they entered the court, they bowed respectfully and said, "Your Majesty, we have traveled far and have seen many rulers. Some rule with an iron fist, others with fear, and some with greed. But we have heard that you rule with kindness. We are curious. Do you believe kindness is always the right path? Are there no situations where harshness is needed?" The king listened carefully and then replied, "Kindness is not weakness, and fairness is not the absence of discipline. A ruler must be wise, knowing when to be gentle and when to be firm. But tell me, what do you mean by harshness? Do you believe that cruelty is sometimes necessary?" One of the merchants stepped forward and said, "We once did business in a kingdom where the ruler was very strict. He punished even the smallest crimes with severe punishment. Thieves had their hands cut off. Liars were imprisoned for life. People feared him, but because of this, crime was low and his kingdom was orderly. Do you believe such strictness is wrong?" The king thought for a moment and then said, "Let me ask you something. If a tree in your orchard has one bad branch, do you cut down the entire tree?" The merchant shook his head. "No, of course not. We only cut the bad branch." The king nodded. "Exactly. If a person does wrong, we must correct the mistake, not destroy the person. Justice should not be about creating fear. It should be about teaching and correcting. If we punish without understanding, we create anger and resentment. But if we guide people toward what is right, we build a stronger society." Another merchant then asked, "But what if someone refuses to learn? What if they continue to harm others?" The king replied, "There will always be those who do not wish to change. When kindness does not work, discipline must follow. But even discipline must be fair. If a person steals because they are hungry, the fault is not only theirs but also of the society that allowed them to suffer. We must ask what led them to steal. Can we prevent it from happening again?" The merchants were silent for a moment, considering his words. Then the eldest merchant said, "Your Majesty, you speak of fairness, but does this mean you never use force? What if an enemy attacks your kingdom? Will you fight with kindness?" The king smiled slightly and said, "A wise ruler must be prepared to defend his people, but war should never be the first choice. It should always be the last. If an enemy comes with violence, we must protect our land, our people, and our way of life. But the goal should not be destruction. It should be peace. Many wars start because rulers act out of pride and anger, not necessity. If war comes, I will fight to protect my people, but I will always seek a way to end it quickly and fairly. A wise king fights only when there is no other choice." The merchants looked at each other, then bowed. "Your Majesty, we have traveled many lands and met many rulers. We have seen power in different forms, through fear, through wealth, and through armies. But today we have seen a different kind of power, one that does not need to show its strength to be respected. We thank you for your wisdom." The king simply nodded and said, "Wisdom is not mine alone. It is learned from life, from experience, and from those who came before us. We must always keep learning." The merchants left, carrying with them a lesson they would share in distant lands. The kingdom remained peaceful not because of fear or force, but because of the wisdom that guided it. The king had shown that true strength comes not from ruling with fear, but from leading with fairness, justice, and an understanding heart. As time passed, the king continued to rule with wisdom and kindness. His people respected him, and his kingdom remained peaceful. But true wisdom is tested in difficult moments, and soon the king would face a great challenge. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the hills, a messenger arrived at the palace. He was out of breath, covered in dust from his long journey. He bowed before the king and said, "Your Majesty, I bring urgent news. A neighboring kingdom is preparing for war. Their king believes that you are weak because you rule with kindness. He plans to invade and take our land." The royal court fell silent. The advisors looked at each other with concern. Some of them believed that war was inevitable. They urged the king to gather his army and strike first. One advisor said, "Your Majesty, we must attack before they do. If we wait, they will bring their soldiers to our land, and many innocent people will suffer. It is better to act now and defeat them before they reach us." Another advisor disagreed. "Your Majesty, war is costly. Even if we win, we will lose many lives. Our land will be destroyed. Our people will suffer. Perhaps we can send a message to the enemy king and find a peaceful solution." The king listened carefully to both sides. He thought about his 3 questions. What is the right time to act? Who are the most important people? What is the most important thing to do? He finally spoke. The right time is now. We cannot ignore the danger. The most important people are those who will suffer if war comes, our people. And the most important thing to do is to prevent suffering. The advisors were confused. But Your Majesty, one of them asked, does that mean we fight or not? The king replied, we must prepare for war, but not with the intention to destroy. We will send a message to the enemy king first. If he is willing to listen, we may still avoid battle. If he refuses, we will be ready to defend our land. The king wrote a letter to the enemy king. In it, he said, strength is not shown through war, but through wisdom. You believe I am weak because I rule with kindness, but kindness is not weakness. It is the power to understand, to guide, and to build a better world. If you attack, we will defend our land, not because we seek war, but because we protect what is ours. But before blood is spilled, I ask you, what do you truly seek? If it is land, we can discuss. If it is wealth, we can trade. But if it is war, understand that violence never ends in victory. Even the winner suffers. Choose wisely. The letter was sent, and the king waited for a response. Days passed, and finally, a messenger from the enemy kingdom arrived. He carried a reply from the other king. The letter read, I expected fear, but I see wisdom. I planned for war, but I see a chance for peace. You are right, true power is not in swords, but in understanding. Let us meet and talk. The two kings met in a neutral place, away from their armies. They spoke not as enemies, but as rulers who wanted the best for their people. They found a way to solve their differences without war. The enemy king returned to his land, and peace was maintained. The advisors were amazed. One of them asked the king, Your Majesty, were you not afraid? If the enemy had refused your message, we would have been in great danger. The king smiled and said, Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to do what is right, even when fear is present. I followed the answers I learned from the hermit. The right time to act is always now. The most important people are those around us. And the most important thing to do is to do good. These answers have guided me, and they will guide us always. The advisors understood. They saw that true wisdom does not just solve small problems. It can even prevent war. The king's decision to seek peace first had saved many lives. His kingdom remained strong, not because of the power of weapons, but because of the power of wisdom. Years passed, and the king continued to rule wisely. His people lived in peace, and his kingdom flourished. But even in times of peace, a ruler must always be prepared for challenges. One day, an old traveler arrived at the palace gates. He was weak, his clothes were torn, and his feet were covered in dust from walking a great distance. The guards hesitated, but the king ordered them to let the man enter. The traveler bowed before the king and said, Your Majesty, I have come from far away. I have heard of your wisdom and kindness. I was once a rich merchant, but I lost everything in a fire. My family is gone, and I have nothing left. I seek your guidance. What should I do?" The king looked at the man with compassion. He did not offer him gold or riches. Instead, he said, "Stay in my kingdom for a while. Find work that helps others, and you will find your way again." The old traveler was surprised. He had expected charity, but instead, the king gave him purpose. He followed the king's advice and began helping farmers in a nearby village. He worked hard, and soon the villagers respected him. They shared food with him, gave him shelter, and treated him as one of their own. Months later, the traveler returned to the palace. He was no longer weak. His clothes were clean, and his face was full of life. He bowed before the king and said, "Your Majesty, I understand now. When I lost everything, I thought my life had no meaning, but by helping others, I found a new purpose. I am grateful for your wisdom." The king smiled and said, "The right time to act is now. The most important people are those around us. And the most important thing to do is to do good." When we follow these truths, life finds a way to restore what is lost. The traveler stayed in the kingdom and became a respected member of the community. He taught others the lessons he had learned. People came to see that wisdom was not just for kings, it was for everyone. As the years passed, the king's reputation spread to distant lands. Other rulers sent messengers to learn from him. They wanted to know the secret of his peaceful and prosperous rule. He told them the same 3 answers he had learned from the hermit. Some understood immediately. Others took time to see their true meaning. But those who applied them saw their lands become stronger, their people happier, and their lives more meaningful. One day, the king, now old, walked through his gardens, thinking about his life. He had ruled for many years, and his kingdom was at peace. He thought about the journey he had taken, the questions he had asked, the lessons he had learned, and the wisdom he had shared. He remembered the hermit, the wounded man, the enemy king, and the traveler. He realized that wisdom is not something you find once and keep forever. It is something you must live every day. The present moment is always the most important time. The people around you are always the most important. And the best thing to do is always to do good. The king continued to rule with kindness until the end of his days. And even after he was gone, his wisdom lived on. His people passed down his teachings from one generation to the next. His kingdom remained strong, not because of weapons or wealth, but because of the wisdom that guided it. And so the 3 questions were answered, not with words alone, but through actions. They were simple truths, yet they had the power to change lives. They reminded everyone that the most important moment is always now. The most important person is always the one in front of you. And the most important thing to do is always to do good. That's the end of the story. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more exciting tales. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for the next adventure. Thanks for watching.